Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. We are now live, and my name is Anna Blanco, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Ocean Film Festival. And it's my pleasure, my honor to welcome you today. We are very, very excited to be hosting this particular Q&A regarding the film Anna and the Thresher Shark. Before we get started, I would like to say a few things about the Ocean Film Festival. I hope everyone has had a chance to watch the film. If not, please do so. We had such a tremendous success with the film festival going virtual that we extended it by a whole week. So the deadline for watching films is now Sunday, August 16th, this coming Sunday. And for those of you who are new, the film festival has a mission of saving our oceans one film at a time. Our goal is to show independent films from around the world about every subject matter that affects our ocean, that touches upon our ocean, and just to engage people about how they can become better stewards. And little did we know that we would be here right now doing a virtual film festival. We were supposed to host the festival in person in March. It is our 17th annual edition, but we would have been in person in March. But due to the pandemic, we had to cancel. And then we decided to host this virtual edition, and it's our first, but it's wildly successful. We're getting people chiming in from all over the world, and it's just been a ton of fun. The Q&As are probably the best part because we get to talk to people and experts like we will today with people from all over the world. And I encourage you to vote for your film that you think is the best film in our Global Audience Choice Award, which enables us to give out a recognition for the film that receives the most votes during this virtual screening. So without further ado, I would like to get us started. So it's my pleasure, my honor to introduce our host for today's conversation, David McGuire. David is a friend, and he has been involved with the film festival for 13 years. He is on the screening committee for the film festival. He helps with our Shark block. He's the founder and director of Shark Stewards, which is a project of Earth Island Institute. He's served on many panels and many discussions, very heavily involved in marine protected areas. And I could go on, but I think I will just turn it over to David and let him do his thing, which he's so good at. So thank you for joining us. Please remember to send in your questions, and we will pass them along, and also let us know where you're chiming in from if you're joining us live. So thanks so much. Thanks to our guest, and thank you, David.
Thank you, Anna. That's great. Happy Shark Week. It's really fun to do a virtual film festival, and I'm really grateful to get our message across through film as a filmmaker and a storyteller and educator. I've been involved with the festival since the third year, so that would be 14 years, and really watched it grow from a one-day festival to a 4-day festival, reaching 5,000 or 6,000 people, including 1,500 underserved school kids who get to see films all about the ocean for free at Fort Mason at the Cal Theater. Unfortunately, because of everyone having to hunker down and try to do our best staying healthy, we're doing these Zooms again. So this is the 4th or 5th that I've done with the festival. And I want to thank our guests because we're all getting Zoomed to death. But so these are more fun. This is more like a conversation with interactions. So we encourage our audience to send questions in, and we'll try to learn more about sharks and how we can save them together. So I introduced the Shark film set 11 years ago when we were campaigning for the California Shark Fin Act that Shark Stewards introduced and passed. But we wanted to advocate for sharks. So I brought this to the board of directors, and it was kind of ironic. I teased the board member. He said, "Who's going to just watch films about sharks? That's the stupidest thing I ever heard." And I'm like, well, have you heard about Shark Week and 60 million viewers or however, And we had our first one. It was all shark sets. And there was a line out the door. We had to turn away almost 100 people. And we had a great panel afterwards with Dr. John McCosker from the Cal Academy, who's my mentor, Maria Brown from National Marine Sanctuary. And it's been going ever since. So I'm really happy to continue this with Anna Oposa and Vince Smith from Blue Endeavors. And Anna is tuning in from the Philippines, from Manila. So she just got up. And thanks for joining us. And so typically I try to show a film, but we're not going to do that. But I encourage everyone to see Anna and the Thresher Shark. You could go to the Ocean Film Festival. It's still screening. And it was funny because I am on the screening committee. So I watch with the committee about 100, 200 films and select them and then, argue about them. We have pizza and wine and every other week for 9 months. We plan this festival. So we have some really great films, and I always look for the shark films, and I discovered this film, Anna and the Thresher Shark. And I had just met Anna the year before. Then in 2018, we helped found the Sabah Shark Protection Association, protecting sharks in Malaysia. And Anna came and spoke, and I was really impressed about how energetic, how creative, how smart she was, how passionate she was. And so I saw this film, I'm like, I met this woman, and I remembered all the shark suits and everything. So we'll get to that, Anna. But I had forgotten that I'd written the blurb for our catalog, and so I want to read it because it's about thresher sharks, are one of my favorite sharks, and we have 3 species off our coast in California, and I've actually got to dive with them, but they go by you about 20 miles an hour, and that was it. But I wrote, a tail like a bullwhip, a face like a fox. What's not to love about the thresher shark? Threatened with extinction, divers are taking steps to protect these enigmatic sharks and where they live. Enter a young and articulate Anna Oposa, a passionate educator, scuba diver, and eco-heroine who is working across the Philippine Islands to save sharks and their habitat. I just watched the film again last night, Anna, and I always bring out fresh material and new memories, and I have pages of notes. But the one thing that I'm really impressed is your bio, and I guess it does come back to passion. You were obviously, and I'd like you to tell us about what your inspiration was as a young Filipina living there in the Philippine Islands, which are beautiful and just incredible diversity and coral reefs. But you ended up creating this organization called the Save Philippine Seas, which you're the executive director, and you're the chief mermaid.
Yes.
Received several awards, including the, what was it? The Future for Nature Award, and very prestigious at 23 years old. I mean, really impressive. So I'm inspired. I, as a teacher, as an activist, we're always, and Vince as well, we're always trying to get young people, especially young women and young women from the culture, to be leaders. And so you've done it. And why don't you tell us your path a little bit and what you're doing now? So let's start with what inspired you. How about that,
David? That was such a generous introduction. I felt like hiding behind my table. So much pressure. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you for having me and inviting me. So let's go way back. My dad is an environmental lawyer. He actually started environmental law in the Philippines. So growing up, environmentalism was just part of my life. Like, I would go to reforestation projects, go to marine protected areas, but I thought it was normal. I thought it was normal to be planting trees, for summer. But I actually want to be a Broadway star. That was my real dream. I was in theater, I was teaching theater, I was performing professionally until after college. Just when I had submitted my thesis, I heard about an illegal wildlife trade case. And in the news, it was called the Rape of the Philippine Seas. And because I earned my law degree in the dinner table, I memorized all the environmental laws in the Philippines. Well, not all, but a lot of the environmental laws in the Philippines. So I decided to write different government agencies and was posting a lot online. And a few strangers and I got together and said, what are we going to do about this? Let's start a campaign called Save Philippine Seas. So the hashtag was Save PHCs, and I just never left. Like, after that issue died down in the news, I stayed on. And a couple of years after, I registered it. I co-founded it as a nonprofit in 2013. So it's been around. So SPS has been around for 9 years. And no one is more surprised than me, I think, that we're still here, that I'm still here.
Well,
Yeah.
I founded an organization and quit my day job, and I know what it takes: the passion, the commitment, eating rice and beans, making those economic sacrifices to try to protect what you love and continue to do. And you're an amazing educator and inspiration for children as well, and that comes out in the film. There's some really great scenes where it's not just sharks; it's dealing with other environmental issues like plastics, right, which are huge
Yeah.
globally, impacting wildlife and marine habitat. Um, well, we'll talk about the film a little bit more, but I wanted to talk really about Malapascua and the Thresher sharks. I say they have a face like a fox because our species is Vulpinus, actually, the genus Alopius
Mm.
vulpinus. But the ones that you guys are seeing are actually the pelagic
Yes,
Thresher
the
sharks,
pelagic
right?
ones. Yep.
I mean, they're just extraordinary sharks. Their tails like a bullwhip over 1/3 of their body length. They use it to crack and actually stun fish. I mean, they're like I said, we see them here and they're motoring, and they shock you. They come out of the blue and then they just disappear like mako sharks, kind of. And you're like, that was a Thresher shark. Well, okay, get out of the boat. That was it. But in these cleaning stations and Monad Shoals,
Mona
uh,
show, yeah.
do you call it Longan, the island? What do you call Malapascua? The
Well,
Tagalog
Logon
name?
is like the official name, but
Okay.
everyone calls it Malapascua.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is interesting because in Spanish it means bad Easter. So I think I like
Yeah.
the native name better. So, but yeah, you have this essentially a deep water bank that has cleaning stations
Yeah.
and attracts these pelagics. And there's some really beautiful cinematography because they're really hard to film.
Yeah. Yeah,
They're
they
really hard.
are.
A lot of times you're shooting down, right, Vince?
Yeah.
I mean, if you get lucky, and Vince and I have been working together, and this is a good segue to introduce Vince. We Shark Stewards and Vince with Blue Endeavors, which is a nonprofit conservation organization, but also teaches diving and engages young people in data and conservation, based in Alameda, but also in Washington State, where he is now. And he's an avid diver and an instructor and photographer, but he is also leads trips, eco-tour trips to areas where it engages local community and education and conservation. And so part of this conversation will be about ecotourism, and it's really a very important component of the film, about how divers are protecting these areas by providing jobs or alternative resources for people who might otherwise fish them or extract them. So Vince, you've led trips down to Malapascua, and can you tell me your experiences, and then maybe we can discuss a little bit what's going on out there in the big world in light of COVID.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for having me on. So last year was our first time, and we actually went and made our home base in Dumaguete. As David was saying, we're really trying to network students from California, Washington, with local students in Dumaguete, and bring really everyone to help support the local work that's being done. So Dumaguete has Silliman University, and so the large part of our project was to see what projects that they're working on and see if we could bring volunteers to help them. And then I learned that there were thresher sharks in Malapascua. So we had a boat to take us to that excursion, because personally, one of the things that I'm very passionate about sharks. I think some of my favorite things in the ocean are the little critters like nudibranchs, and then definitely I've loved just spending time filming sharks in different cleaning stations all over. So we definitely did last year was the exploratory trip, and we went up to Malapascua. And the one thing I was very impressed with was we had a dive master, Sapus, who took us out to the cleaning stations. And one of the things we were worried about, as we've seen in other places, is how do they treat the animals? How respectful are they? we were very impressed with how that operation ran. So they definitely had downlines. It was about staying out of the natural habits of the thresher sharks and just being a part of the experience. Even from a filming standpoint, it made it much more challenging to get the shots that you want. But I think I love that attitude, right? Where it's you should be able to have this experience, but it's really about not invading the space of the threshers. So it was definitely a fantastic experience. Really seeing them, they're such shy sharks in that it was a lot of waiting for them to come by and maybe have enough curiosity to come a little bit closer to us. It was really funny because we even saw there were two octopus that started mating in front of everyone, and we all had this feeling like we're just like, and you're usually like on a dive, like seeing two octopus mate, and then they were trying to find the hole that the female is gonna go into for the rest of her life to tend her eggs. And you see there's like this whole amazing wildlife dance happening, and we're like, but the sharks, we're just waiting for the sharks. So it's an amazing experience when everybody lets two octopus mating go off on their own and still are focused on the threshers. So it was definitely a very positive experience for us. We were planning this summer to go back with high school students here and again train some high school students, locals in Dumaguete, to do some data collection and also work on some projects. That's been pushed back to next year, but we're definitely going, and you really see the big difference in how that experience to other places we were in the Philippines around Cebu, where, for instance, we were diving and there was dynamite being, fishing on top of us. And so one of the things I think, if I could speak for most of the people on that expedition, it left you with, this is one of the most amazing places in the world. And you definitely see people like yourself, Anna, that like are doing the advocacy, doing these amazing things, the people at Silliman University, like there's all this great work, and it's how do we support that work with the dollars we're bringing to the operators that are doing things the right way. We're all want to volunteer our time, both the students and the adults that come with us. Everybody, that's how they want to spend their vacation is yes, getting to see the flamboyant cuttlefish, getting to see the thresher shark, but also what do we do? How do we help? And so that's what we're excited to do and to support people like yourself.
So I think that's kind of a good segue. Vince, you and I talked about in some of our episodes that we did, our Ocean Action series online. We talked about ecotourism, we talked about COVID, but the benefit to shark diving in particular globally, I mean, it's at least $1 billion industry, and a lot of people are relying on it. And I was just reading an article today about, concerns about Guadalupe and the white sharks. Not only are the families dependent upon that income, the Mexican families, the captains, the boat guys, the dive operators, but also the same thing is, with this concern with this Chinese fishing fleet off the Galapagos. There's clear poaching going on there on the Hammerhead Highway. And suddenly that spigot of money and those eyes and ears have kind of stopped. And I was wondering, we know that I was looking at the value. I couldn't find any recent values on thresher shark diving, actually, but we had a socioeconomic study done by the Australia Institute of Marine Sciences for Sabah. And one shark was worth around $800,000 a year to the local economy. And we've seen that in Palau and other nations, that sharks are worth far more alive than dead. And I know that a lot of that's been done in Cebu and Donsol with the whale sharks, but there were some real issues there. Again, improper practices, boats running over whale sharks. We had a film in our festival, actually, in the Ocean Film Festival, with Neela Ayuni, and she came and visited, and she was a Chinese broadcaster, but a filmmaker. And it's, what was it called? Uncharted, On the Brink, Uncharted Waters. It was a really good investigative piece, but also how people are trying to achieve solutions. But essentially, Oslab is like whale shark city, whale shark t-shirts, whale shark flags, whale shark banana splits, I mean, the whole town came out around the shark. So a huge amount of livelihood is dependent, and it's suddenly that's tap got turned off. Anna, do you know what's going on in Malapascua or in Cebu, or are there any tourists at all? What are the people doing to survive? Do you think there's any fishing going on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, obviously, the whole tourism industry, the global tourism industry, is suffering because of COVID and the limited movement. And in Malapascua, obviously, there are no tourists allowed. They're very strict on who can go there. It's just the residents. So so the Philippines had the longest, strictest lockdown for 2 months. We were not allowed to go out of our houses unless it was for essential services. So even in Malapascua, obviously there was no tourism. And then when the lockdowns eased, then the people who got stranded there, the tourists who got stranded there, could dive, but in limited times only. Like there were certain times that you could go. I think now the government of Cebu is trying to create certain guidelines and policies for reopening, but everything is still hazy. So in the Philippines, like in Manila and in other parts of the Philippines, we just went back to a stricter lockdown because the cases have been increasing. So it doesn't look very um, it doesn't look very bright for the tourism industry in the next, I don't know, few months. But hopefully, by, I don't know, 2021, early 2021, we can start resuming tourism activities, or at least encourage local tourism, which I hope will help with diving and with the sharks in Cebu.
Yeah, I hope so as well. I mean, it's clearly affecting us all, and I'm embarrassed to say that my country is leading the world in cases and deaths and lack of leadership in managing our cases. So you're probably not going to let us in, unfortunately. I usually work in Indonesia this time of year. We started a conservation center with local partners called source.org in Lombok. And, we're just trying to help them. They're just hunkered down, just trying to keep the protected area protected. But the word is from there's a lot more gleaning of the reef. There's more fishing in the protected area, which is really hard because it's more locally enforced.
Right.
And people need food as well, right?
Yeah,
with the
exactly.
stores, there's less supply chain.
Exactly.
I think it's a really sad case for the ocean as well. Vince, have you heard any rumors or any discussion from your colleagues around the world about the same thing, about the lack of tourism and the concern of fishing sharks?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the unknown consequences of this. I think everybody's very concerned about, right? Like, I think it's a problem. I haven't heard specifically about numbers about what's happening with sharks, but I think we are very concerned about it.
Yeah, just David, to add to what you said earlier. So the Philippines and Indonesia are very similar in a way that they're both archipelagic. So they're made up of little small islands. And when the lockdowns happened, people were saying, "Oh, the ocean is healing because there's no tourism." And maybe there's some truth to that there's not a lot of activity, so some ecosystems can partially recover, but also it means that there's no income for the community, and also means that there's also less enforcement and patrolling in the marine protected areas. So there have been reports, as you mentioned, in Indonesia, there have been reports in the Philippines as well of people fishing in protected areas, of illegal fishing, of increased dynamite fishing. And on the one hand, it's like, well, they shouldn't be doing that. But on the other hand, it's like survival, where because the supply chains are broken, and it's even harder to get goods to far-flung and remote islands. How do you reconcile that, and how do you manage it? So it's been really complicated, to say the least.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I ask Anna maybe? Oh, sorry. One thought, question, kind of along those lines that we've really struggled with. So we're always, trying to do expeditions and trips that have a conservation, restoration work with locals, and even before COVID with the whale sharks, we've actually had our students do debates before we go on these trips, because you really do see both sides of it, right? Like you
Yeah.
see economies are completely dependent on the whale shark tourism.
Yeah.
Previously, people were hunting and there was death to whale sharks, from what I understand. Now they're feeding them, so they are changing behavior. And some of the stuff, when we've been out there, we've seen just large, massive groups of tourists from other countries who are in life vests bumping into each other.
Yeah.
And so it's one of these things, by us going there, if we participated in as scuba divers, it's supporting this. But what's the right approach if the whales are if it's helping the locals survive, they're not poaching the whale sharks, but maybe this, what I mean? It's a tough issue. And
Yeah, it is. And I think, honestly, the Oslob issue is probably the most polarizing environmental shark issue in the Philippines. And I just have a slight digression, but a funny story. So a few years ago, Miss Universe went to Oslob, and they filmed in Oslob as part of like the promotions. So my friends and I, my environmental friends and I, we wrote to the Department of Tourism and we said, among all the 7,107 islands of the Philippines, are you really going to feature one that exploits whale sharks unsustainably? And then I went on the news because everyone else was busy at that time. So I ended up being in like the primetime news. And then I got bashed, like I got cyberbullied because, people are like, why are you anti people making a living? Or are you, who do you think you are trying to take away the livelihood of people? And my favorite comment was, she's bitter because she's not pretty enough to be a beauty queen pageant contestant. But and then there were people who went on my Instagram, looked for my pictures of sharks and said, see, you swim with sharks, you're a hypocrite, why are you speaking against Oslob? So it's really a really sensitive and touchy issue. On what the right approach is, honestly, I don't know. And you can't, it's already such a big industry that it's going to be very hard, if not impossible, to completely shut it down. But then I think there are precautions you can put in place and really follow it. So one organization, so there are guidelines, like there's a certain number of boats, there's a certain number of people, a certain time. But there's an organization, an NGO, Lamada, that did a compliance study. So how much are people actually following the rules? And if I remember correctly, it was like 3%. The compliance rate was 3%. So I think the first step would be really to follow the guidelines that you set in place. And also, it's like a factory. So I've never been there, just out of my own personal like protest, but things I've read and I've watched, it's like a factory. People go there, they symbolically watch a video on how to protect whale sharks and the guidelines, and then they go to the sea, and then there's no, they don't really follow the limit, they don't follow the distance, the prescribed distance. So it really has to be a commitment. Because also, I think if there are thousands of people in the water, is that really going to be a pleasant experience for you and for the sharks? Like, I don't think so. So it's about improving the quality of the experience more than, and it's hard. Like, you these are people who used to earn pennies and now they earn thousands of pesos from this livelihood, and they're able to send their kids to school, they're able to get healthcare, they're able to buy a house, a boat. So it just has to be done in a way that won't exploit the sharks as much as they do now.
Who could we as outsiders, because we never want to go into a community in another country with our own opinions, who right now in the Philippines can we as citizen scientists, students, eco-tourists, if we want to put our dollars to support the people doing the most amazing work out of there, where should we be looking right now, in your opinion?
Well, Green Fins has a program. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but they accredit dive shops and snorkeling shops. based on how like eco-friendly they are, their green fence guidelines. So I think that would be a good place to start to see which ones they've worked with. And then just taking a look at reviews also. I mean, it's always helpful to see like travel blogs and reviews of how things are going. And then just to go back to Oslo, I remember the governor of Cebu said that when they reopen, they're going to set a limit of 1,000 people per day. And before it used to be 3,000 people per day.
A lot
And
of
the
people.
prescribed, that's a lot of people. And the prescribed number is actually 200. So
Yeah.
we're still way above
Yeah.
what we should be,
Yeah.
doing. Yeah.
I would love to see personally, like if we had to earn it more, you know, if you respected these whale sharks in a way where it's like, you don't get to just pay money, not know how to swim, go out there, float, and get a selfie for Facebook. Like you have to earn it. What did you do to the whale sharks? What did you do to the local community to really help? That was always, I would love to see that, but you know, how do we do that? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's a fairly new industry and it is evolving. I was thinking, you know, I've been diving off of Mexico with whale sharks, and I think kind of addressing part of the question, if you can find those corners and just dive those places, like, you know, the migration route up outside of La Paz, if you know the right time, you can actually be the only one there as they're coming by, as they're migrating natural behavior. But there's an island off Holbox, and actually a friend of mine, and he's with Mission Blue, Kip Evans, made a film with Sylvia Earle and the whale sharks of Holbox, which was in our shark set a few years ago at the Ocean Film Festival. But they actually went through about a lot of fits and starts, and the same thing, running over whales, people jumping on the backs. But the last time I went, it was really well regulated and self-regulated, because there was actually a fisherman that killed one of the whale sharks in his net deliberately. And the other fisherman found out about it and put a lot of pressure on this fisherman. He ended up moving out of town. So, you know, that's threatening their livelihood. So if you have that vested interest, and ideally you have the vested interests for the animals as well. So it does need to be managed, but the positive sign is, you know, it's probably $1 billion industry and growing. Well, it was. You know, and in the film, the Uncharted Waters film, they kind of compare the research area over by Donsol to Oslo, and it seems like they don't feed the sharks at Donsol. And so the sharks do tend to continue their migration. There wasn't a lot of data there, but there was some tracking data that seems to suggest they're not being habituated, which is a bit of a concern, right? But if the sharks are going to get killed when they leave anyway, maybe it's good to just keep feeding them, right, and keep them there. It's a dilemma, right? There is no clear answer, as Anna said. It's a slippery slope, and there has to be some negotiations and compromise, I guess.
Exactly.
I mean, we see in Mexico a lot, which is it's not a poor country, but parts of it seem really poor. And there were some fishermen that I went with to see white sharks off the Pacific coast. And these guys, we call them pangueros, and they're just these little boatmen. And they actually were augmenting their income, and they're lobster divers, and they wouldn't dive if they'd see the tiburon blanco, you know, so they would stay on the island. And they're like, well, you guys could go diving, but we're not going to. But they actually managed it really well. It's a very small, it's not on Guadalupe, it's on some of the smaller islands. And so there can be some of those more smaller scale, better managed, I think, than the mass tourism. In particular with the new emerging market with China and Chinese tourism. I mean, at Sabah and Indonesia, it's crazy. It's like,
yeah,
they're the ones with the water wings. They don't have good water skills. And I mean,
and they come in buses.
Right. And sometimes they don't even come with a local guide. And I think that's a big issue. And it's going to be a big issue again because of their spending power. So, Anna, why don't you tell us about your education efforts in your school programs? Because that's featured pretty prominently in Anna and the Thresher Shark. And I know you're a performer, and you can tell actually by your, what is it? Do you call it the sharkada, the shark?
The sharkada. So that's actually a pun So just to backtrack a little bit, I in college I majored in English studies because I thought I would be like a professor or a writer. So I've, you know, come to this love for wordplay, which features prominently in all of the materials of Say Philippine Sea. So in the Philippines, your best friends, your group of best friends is called barkada. So we decided to call our group of like sharks that we're promoting Sharkada, just so that it's easy to remember. So we created mascots of the Thresher shark, and other sharks that were featured in like multilateral negotiations to give them, to change the way we look at sharks, right? Because until now, even with all the media, there's still a lot of fear, especially in the Philippines, about what sharks can do. And we I'm sure you've heard of the Baby Shark song, right? Like
Oh
it's
God.
pretty much everywhere. Yeah. So they had a mall tour in the Philippines. It's such a big hit. So we decided to reach out to them. We wrote them a letter and we said, "Can we join your shark? Can we join your shark tour?" And we had in the opening, the kickoff of the mall tour, we actually were allowed to go and we gave them an award, like we call it the Migo sa Iho Award, which means like Friends of the Shark Award, for raising the awareness of children and parents all over the world on sharks. So that's just, and it's funny because when I was in college, so I used to perform, right? And one of my gigs was to host the mall show of Totally Spice, which is like a show, like a cartoon show for little girls. So it felt like that. There were like 500 screaming children in the audience, and I was there being like, "Dude, does everyone here love sharks?" Like it was just so funny. But those are just some of the creative ways that we've engaged people in sharks. But in the film, for Malapascua in particular, we discovered that about 70% of the children have never been in the water, have never gone snorkeling, have never been to the marine protected area, because you need resources to go to the marine protected area. You need to rent a boat, you need to have a snorkeling set. And we realized that they didn't have that. And to me, that was unfair. And I couldn't like comprehend how that reality was. So with funds that we had from different agencies and aid agencies, we were able to do like a weekly, depending on the weather, but as much as possible, we would try to get like 20 kids out, at least 20 kids out every Saturday morning, teaching them about the local. And we created like laminated boards of corals and fish that could be found in those marine protected areas, just to teach them, basic ecology, like, rocks are alive. Sorry, corals are not rocks, they're alive. And that people from all over the world come here to see the sharks. And you, of all people, should be proud that you're from here and you need to protect it. Then we play games, and then we eat snacks together after. And that's been really helpful in getting young people to appreciate what they have, because I think that's one of the things that, being Filipino and being around such high biodiversity, we tend to take it for granted. And I've been very fortunate to have been able to travel all over the world. And I remember my first time to dive abroad, I was maybe 20, and I was in Mexico, in Cancun. And the dive master said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from the Philippines." And he said, "Oh, don't expect anything, okay? You're going to come out disappointed." And then I was like, "Oh, you only have like 3 fish? I only saw 3 kinds of fish." So I was a bit of a snob. But because we see that all the time, we don't realize and appreciate it. So that's what we wanted to instill in the students. And then we also had a program for teachers, for them to be able to teach, so that it's more sustainable. We train the teachers on how to teach marine ecology and marine ecosystems and simple waste management, segregation. So that's been some of the work that we've done in Malapascua.
Hmm. And so most of your work is funded through grants and donations,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
us. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but also awards, right? So, can you tell us about that award that you received? I think it was in 2013. 2011?
2012. Well, 20. I applied for it in 2011, and then I got awarded in 2012. And that's a very like funny story because I had just graduated from college in 2011, and I was kind of doing a lot of like shark campaigns in the Philippines. And my friend forwarded the email to me and said, "Why don't you apply?" And I looked at the past winners, and they're like PhDs and in their early 30s, and I was like, there's no way I'm gonna get this. I'm like 22, 23. But anyway, because of my attitude of nothing to lose, everything to gain, I applied. And then I got the call and said, you won the award. You're one of the three winners for the Future for Nature. And I at first I was like, it's just a joke. And then so I ended up going to the Netherlands and receiving the award. And what's amazing about the award is that you get 50,000 euros. And before that, SPS had no funding. It was all a it was a social media campaign, and suddenly I had 50,000 euros. And in the Philippines, where the cost of living is low, that was a lot of money to start with. But it was also overwhelming because so in the application form they ask you like, what would you do with this money? And I said, I'm going to put up the first like shark sanctuary in the Philippines. I was like 22. I had no idea what I was saying, but it sounded nice, right? So when I got the award, I was like, oh my god, it means I have to do it. It means I have to use this money and put up this sanctuary. How do I even start? So I ended up moving to Malapascua and then starting the shark project for the Thresher sharks. And I was very lucky to have there was a lot of work already being done in Malapascua. And I think my value was connecting the different stakeholders together, because the scientists were doing something, the dive operators were doing something, the government was doing something, but they weren't necessarily talking to each other. And I think that was the value of, I always joke that I'm like the Switzerland of conservation, because I'm like the one in the middle, like connecting people and the one talking to the different stakeholders. I didn't have a science background until I did my master's. And I think in a way that was an advantage, that my communications background became an advantage in trying to translate what the government wanted to do and what the scientists wanted to do into measures or into initiatives that would enable people to participate or relate to. So that changed my life. The Future for Nature award, I always say it changed my life. And if I didn't win that award, I don't know what I would be doing. I don't know if I would still be in conservation, honestly, because it changed the trajectory of what I was doing back then.
So you also helped, I guess that this was sort of what kind of spawned out of that, was the Save Sharks Network Philippines, that it was, that around
Yeah, so
trying to get all of those stakeholders together to help
yeah.
the sharks.
Yeah, the history of Safe Sharks Network Philippines was, we found out that Philippine Airlines, which is the flagship carrier of the Philippines, they were shipping shark products. And that was a time when, different organizations were getting airlines and shipping lines to stop shipping shark products. So we wrote them a letter, we had a meeting with them, and they said, no, we don't ship shark products. Where did you get that idea? And then we found out from a friend in Hong Kong who took a picture of a cargo shipping with shark products with the logo of Philippine Airlines. So he took a picture, sent it to us. We started a petition, and in less than 24 hours, Philippine Airlines said, "Okay, we're not going to ship shark products anymore. You got us." And my friend Vince and I and AA, two of my sharkada, I call them my BFFs or my best fin friends. We got together over ramen. I still remember that day, it was raining, and we were like, where will we take this momentum? Because it's all over the news, it's in the front page of the news. Sharks have never had this much attention. How do you ride this energy? And we thought, why don't we arrange a shark summit and we bring different stakeholders together? And it was students, government, law enforcers, campaigners, activists, artists, and that became the first Shark Summit and the Safe Sharks Network Philippines in 2014. And then we did it again in 2016 and 2018, and we were supposed to do it again this year, but I don't know, maybe a virtual version. But that became really, it became a way to get shark people together and kind of align ourselves, like, what are you guys doing in Dumaguete, what are you doing in Davao, what are you doing in Cebu? Because again, communication is one of the most like undervalued um solutions in conservation, I think. So it's just aligning and getting to know what everyone's doing already helps a lot. And there have been, significant, I would say, successes that have come out of the shark summits.
Yeah, well, it's impressive. It's a lot of work getting those sometimes conflicting stakeholders together. As
Yeah.
here in California, I've been involved with our California Marine Protected Area Network for about 15 years, and trying to get people who fish it, people who recreate, people who want to leave it alone, or people who want to completely protect everything. But you have to come to some kind of consensus. And it kind of comes back to, these areas of sort of peak tourism or dive tourism. Maybe those are the areas you stay focused on, and then try to protect the areas that aren't as impacted, that don't have as much direct human impact. One of the things I was wondering, because my first introduction to the Philippines was in the early 2000s with the California Academy of Sciences, and the Cal Academy has a long-standing relationship and partnership with the Philippines, particularly the Natural History Museum. And Dr. Terry Gossliner, a colleague, a friend of mine, is Dr. Nudibranch. He's literally written the book, second edition. And we were diving with him up in Anilao. We had a whole biodiversity team. So we were there for a couple of months just with local scientists and divers, just looking for new species. And with the terrestrial team, we discovered 300 new species in that expedition. Just amazing. And although we almost saw no sharks, we actually discovered a new species of shark, a swell shark.
The one that blows up, right?
Yeah, the deep sea.
Yeah.
So it's way down there. But what we were also, also we were seeing the impacts of fish bombs, dynamite fishing. We've been working with a group called Stop Fish Bombing in Sabah to stop this. But Terry had seen, because of the increase in diving in Anilao, that there was the fish bombing seemed to have stopped. And we dove these craters that you could see the coral recovering, or the soft corals. And he's like, yeah, that was, 15 years ago. So these long-term surveys can have such benefit, where you can also see some good come out of it, as well as a little bit of destruction in there as well. But I know, Vince, have you felt it when you're in the water and you feel these impacts from this fish blasting?
Oh yeah, it's intense. I had never felt that before, and everybody had the same experience. The first time we heard it happen, we all looked around because we thought somebody blew a hose. Like that's what and everybody was okay. And then it just kept happening time and time again. And eventually we kind of figured out what was going on. We exited the water and we saw these boats, and they were just, almost, it seemed almost homemade boats. I don't even know how they got that far out in the water. And we just saw them dynamite fishing. And we talked to the dive master, and he actually had a friend of his die on a dive, another dive master from dynamite fishing. It just collapsed the topography around him, and he passed. So it was, I'd never experienced that before. It really did stick with us, because just seeing this place you love just decimated, and also just having the experience of going to a place in the world where there's the most biodiversity that you've almost ever seen, and then you see places that are just kind of wiped out and dead from that. So it was a very, very striking experience.
Yeah, what we see in Malaysia, in Borneo, that is, because it's Sabah. The Sabahans are actually closely related to the Southern Filipinos, and they speak the same dialect. And there were the Bajalao, the people. They're basically boat people who used to drift around. They were nomads, and now the lines drawn after World War II. It's like, okay, you're the Philippines. Okay, you're Malaysia. Well, those people are still related. And there's been some problems in that, you know, they're smuggling these blasting caps. They just make them out of fertilizer. And it's greed to begin with. It's also a little bit of, there's some politics in there. And, you know, there's a movement to secede, and there's a group associated with ISIS. And I helped a friend of mine, Dr. Steve Oakley, found this conservation lab, and we supported it, called TRACK on Pom Pom Island. It's still going, but we had to leave the island the first year because somebody got kidnapped and people were fish bombing and there was violence. And then we came back, and it's still going on, track.org, and restoring the reef and teaching young people how to dive. But the next island called Calapuan, where I filmed actually in the film festival, Alice in Borneo's Wonderland. We taught a Chinese young woman learn how to dive, and she's now an advocate for marine safety, marine conservation and sharks. But Calapuan is where all the natives lived, and that we hired to support the lab. But 2 divers got killed there by a fish bomb. And, you know, it might have been sort of directed, but it's terrible. If people want to learn more, there's a sister project associated with us at the Earth Island Institute called Stop Fish Bombing. So IUU, fishing illegal, unregulated, unreporting, is responsible for 20% of fishing in the world, you know, billions of dollars of loss. And again, coming back to COVID, may be on the increase. So we need to get healthy. Anna, you need to get healthy. I'm concerned about you. I guess it's you're coming off winter there, and you sound like you have the sniffles.
No, I have what you call allergic rhinitis, so I actually sneeze a lot every early morning.
Okay.
So
Good.
yeah, no winter here though. It's like 36 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, it's hot there, right?
30 degrees Celsius. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, well, it's usually me, like my sinus is draining because I'm in the water as much as I can, and you're always getting salt water. The diver's curse, right? Wow, well, that's really fascinating. So I guess, you know, Vince, can you tell me a little bit more about Blue Endeavor's plans, and you know, tell me about the Bonaire trip and what you're doing in Bonaire.
Yeah, so we started off actually there back in 2012 with again high school students working on coral restoration, and it's the whole concept is to get the students doing hands-on work to make a difference. And so they would learn how to keep nurseries clean, learn the techniques for coral restoration, start rebuilding reefs. That project has expanded. And again, we're just collaborating with the organizations we find doing this amazing work all over the world. Reef Renewal is doing it in Bonaire now and in Honduras. So we've gone out to Honduras to work with them. And it really was the first time we just saw the experience that these students were having, to the point some of these families have come back to me years later, and we had one family that travels with their daughter all over the world, and they just recently said, you know, all their daughter keeps talking about is that one trip to Bonaire where you were doing the coral restoration, and they've been to African safaris and everything else, and it really, that's how we knew we were onto something special, and that again has now expanded to what we call citizen scientists, just everybody. And I have conversations on a regular basis with people that have had the experience of going on a recreational vacation, like a recreational dive vacation, and they feel like they're just taking, like they're spending money, they are supporting the local economy, but they're not actually doing something. And as soon as we've been opening up these experiences, and whether it's with identifying mantas in Socorro, which is another project we have coming up with David McGuire and Shark Stewards, or coral restoration, you just see people light up, and this is the experience they want. And our philosophy is we're trying to sponsor the next generation of leaders in this field. So we definitely give scholarships to students in the US, in the Caribbean, in the Philippines, and other countries to participate in this. We've never given a scholarship to adults. They get to pay for their experience, but they're happy to do it, to have this kind of quality experience and feel like they're giving back to this thing that they love. And I really, and I know it's very anecdotal, we don't really have the numbers on it, but just everybody I talk to, even on the street casually, and they ask, what do I do? And I explain this, they're like, how do I make that my next vacation? You know, I think, especially when we look at the younger generation, the millennial generation, the younger generation, like they don't want to travel like their parents and grandparents did anymore. They don't want to, you know, sit in a fancy resort and have room service and look at the ocean. They want to do something, and the more it's giving back to the world, because they are watching the same conservation shows. I mean, when we started this with high schools, the number one comment was, you know, we're watching movies like The Cove about the dolphins, and you know, we're just shut down. We feel not empowered to do anything in our lives. We're depressed about the state of the world, especially at a young age. They're like, this wasn't the world we created, and what do we do? And you know, so that was fundamentally why I started Blue Endeavors, was to give students a place like, okay, well, let's start going and doing something, you know, let's start trying to work towards these problems. And that feeling of empowerment just really builds. And, you know, you see, we started the Socorro project I just mentioned. It was taking students out in 2019 to try to work on better data collection methods for megafaunas. And just last week, and a lot of the things with high school students, they don't ever tell me that they have these earth-changing experiences, but we have an intern now, and she was telling one of the other people at Blue Endeavors that it really set the course of her life. She came on this trip, and I knew she enjoyed the experience, but that's about it. And then I find out, oh, she's interning for us, and she just wrote this paragraph that was really very touching about how just spending time with the oceanic mantas of Socorro has now changed her life path, and this is what she wants to do. And it touches you. I mean, it's and this is the thing. Like I think I look at my role in this. If I could get students like her to get inspired, start their own organizations, do these amazing things in the world, like it's, you know, we could do this. So.
Yeah, we can. And I think the best hope, well, I mean, we work with young people on a routine basis. I'm a teacher. You know, it inspires me, but it's really like we're giving them, Anna, you're kind of a different generation, but we're giving them kind of not a very good deal. You know, I mean, my life hasn't contributed a lot to that. I mean, other than being a first world citizen, or citizen, as Anna calls it. But, you know, our energy use and our life choices. But a lot of people have a huge impact, but I'm seeing that too, you know, this voluntourism, we call it. Yeah. And I love that. That's both the model of track and pom pom, and also Source and Lombok, where you got to go to work. You can't just lounge around. You know, it's like you're going to either be coral restoration, fish counts, help around the camp, and it's fun, and it builds community, and also builds relationships with the local people. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of hope there. You know, hopefully we'll lift all the boats in the rising tide. And, you know, I guess thinking about like, what can we do now? You know, I remember the closure was at Boracay.
Boracay, yeah.
Boracay. So a hugely popular tourist island in the Philippines, just too many people, not enough infrastructure, no ability to get rid of plastic or trash, sewage, and the government just shut it down. And it was actually 19,000 jobs were lost, and $1 billion in revenue to that local economy. So it makes sense to kind of set up in advance and don't just grow, you know, crazy, have some planning, but also, you know, going back to what we can do. We do beach cleanups here in San Francisco. I've been doing them most of my whole life with the Surfrider Foundation. I grew up as a surfer, so it's very important to me. And I've seen plastic increase, particularly cigarette butts. And so we actually take kids, teach them about plastic, the impacts, and then go down to the beach, which they love to do, but they also count it and quantify it. And they also can see the impact of not only how bad it is, but also what you've done. You know, at the end of the day, you can see how much you've removed. So we're seeing more COVID trash, more masks and gloves, not like Gary Stokes, a Sea Shepherd, he's sent from Hong Kong, you know, gigantic piles of masks. But I wonder if there's any of that going on in the Philippines or near you, Anna, or people are going out, and are you seeing less plastic at least because there's less tourists?
No, that's actually so. If you go to Save PHC's our Instagram and our Facebook, we released two sets of infographics called "Plastic in the Pandemic," and we did a facts versus fears kind of infographic set because plastic use is increasing. You know, people again, it's like nature is healing. People are not using as much plastic, but actually that's false. First of all, medical waste has increased, and it's hard to argue against medical waste because that's safety and the lives of people. So I wouldn't question that the use of disposable PPEs and masks in medical settings. But then e-commerce, ordering stuff online, and I'm guilty of this too. I'm not a perfect zero waster. I've ordered a lot of things online and they come in box in a box in a box in bubble wrap, so that has increased a lot. Food deliveries have increased a lot. So we're actually, and there are already studies, at least in Singapore and in Thailand, of how much waste has increased in the last few months during the lockdowns. And I think the best, we also released like some tips that you can do to try your best to decrease your plastic waste without compromising your safety. So you can read that on our social media platforms. But definitely waste is still a big problem.
Yeah, well, so that's savephilippines.org is your website, and then I saw you at
Yeah.
Facebook because I saw the sharkata on there.
Yeah.
One of the things that I thought was really funny is that you had like the Beatles on Abbey Road. You had the sharks walking across the street in the same.
Yeah.
So that's really great. I encourage people to go to Save Philippine Seas social media, especially. You're very active. I just started following you on Instagram. We're building our presence, and you've got a big following. Yeah, so I guess we can all try to reduce. Obviously, I mean, I'm guilty as well. I just ordered something, a camera part from Amazon, right? And they come in those Mylar envelopes. But we have this new logo now, and we have new T-shirts. So I'm sending T-shirts out in the Amazon packaging. So at least it gets 2 lives instead of 1 use. They're not really recyclable, unfortunately.
Yeah, but we can extend the life, right? Yeah.
And I think in San Francisco, there was a film recycling program, meaning the plastic film, because there's fairly good job of recovery on the the peat and the HDPE plastics, but we only recycle about 10% of our plastics. I mean, it's terrible here in the United States as well. But the films are really the things that nobody recycles. And there was a program, and there was some regulations that we're involved with, and that's all suspended. And you definitely see more trash in the streets. There's less street cleaning. So I'm walking around. I always carry a couple gloves with me, as well as my mask. And so I'm that dude cleaning the neighborhood before I get to the beach. I live a few blocks from the bay, actually. So yeah, I'm like the bag lady, except for the bag man with the trash. So I guess that's all we can do. I mean, try to minimize, try to stay healthy ourselves, wear our masks, right? I mean, protect each other and protect especially the at-risk population, and hopefully get out there in the ocean as soon as we can and start saving. And I really, you make me want to come back to the Philippines and seeing what you're doing. And it'd be great if we could do some kind of Blue Endeavors trip with at Malapascua or one of the other areas that may be less crowded, because I don't like diving behind a rope.
Yeah.
And I like, Vince and I have been talking about, we're both into hammerheads and rebreather diving, because I've been a free diver for a long time, but I'm kind of getting old and I can still do it, but I can't go down as deep as I used to, and you can't stay down as long as you'd like to film. But again, it kind of comes back to this whole COVID thing. It's really about breath. It's about being healthy. It's about relying on the ocean for our oxygen. And really, it's about the ocean that connects us all. So I feel super connected to you, Anna, all the way across the ocean. Hopefully, we'll be working together again to save sharks of the Coral Triangle. We're moving at kind of a new headquarters in Singapore, which is number 2 in the shark fin trade, trying to raise awareness, trying to reduce that. You talked about Air Philippines. We worked on Air Malaysia, and they said they dropped it from their manifesto. We're at the United Airlines here in the U.S., to stop transport. We're working on FedEx now because UPS and DHL says they don't ship shark fins. So we have a campaign to ask them to stop shipping shark fin. But, you know, we've kind of waited. We wanted to do a sting operation and then expose it. But we'll wait till this COVID. You know, we want businesses to operate because people are suffering.
Yeah.
So we didn't get too many questions. There is a shout out from Raphael, who I called Rachel, who just made a comment about what a great show this is. He just signed up to our Facebook page, and he's yeah, again, needing my glasses. I'm like, well, Rachel says in the last one I did on we were talking about this film called The Mill. I guess one last question I can ask, because we didn't really talk about the process of the film and who brought it to you, and you know, how did that transpire? Obviously, you're clearly featured in Anna and the Thresher Shark, and you're very articulate and well-spoken, I have to say. Your media training shines. But did a filmmaker come to you? What was the genesis of the film?
Yeah, so it's a production company that's been doing a series of documentaries on women and wildlife. And they reached out and sent me links of the work that they've done before. So that's how it started. It took maybe a year of emails before they ended up going to Malapascua. And it always feels weird. Like, I feel like, you know, the work of saving sharks in the Philippines is obviously such a collective effort, and it feels kind of just weird to have my name like as a title of a film with the Thresher Shark. But I mean, so what we've obviously tried to do is to shine the light on the other people and other organizations that are working on treasures and sharks in general in the Philippines. And I have a confession that I've actually never seen the whole thing, because it's just so gross to watch yourself on camera. I don't know. It just never gets easier. It's like I start watching a few minutes and I'm like, so yeah.
Well,
but
you did
it
a great
was
job.
fun. Yeah.
It's a really powerful film, and it was our anchor film in our Shark Block, and we were hoping to get you out and have you on stage and talking about it, but this is the next best thing. It is great to connect both virtually and across the ocean. That connects us all. I want to thank Anna Oposa and Vince Smith. You can go to their websites, their social media. You can donate, and to the film festival, which is also a nonprofit. And hopefully see you in person next year. Maybe we'll do a film. Vince and I have been talking about doing a film. Maybe we'll do a film on Anna and Vince and David and the Thresher Shark. International Film Festival, year 18 in 2021, where we can celebrate that wonderful shark behind Vince's head. Well, I want to thank the audience. I especially want to thank the participants for participating. If you are listening, you can vote for your Audience Choice Award. Watch for us online and watch for us next year, and see you on the internet. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.